Capital Record, where we defend free enterprise and capital markets because we believe in the dignity of the human person. Hello, welcome to David Bonson's Capital Record, brought to you by National Review. Today I want to talk about the fact that the Nobel Prize for Economics is indeed a prestigious award, but it has not always been useful in rewarding good economics. This year, though, the Nobel Committee got it right. We should all be grateful. We're going to talk about what that means here in Capital Record. Over the years, I think the Nobel Committee that awards the Nobel Prize for Economics has been, shall we say, up and down. There have most certainly been very prestigious, wonderful winners. And by the way, even economists that I don't like or I don't agree with have been very deserving awardees over the years. And then, of course, there's ones who I adore because I happen to believe with their framework of economics or their belief system about economic theory and practice. And I think about the fact that in the 1970s, both Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman won a Nobel Prize for economics. I think about one of the fathers of the supply side movement, Robert Mundell, receiving a Nobel Prize for economics. So there have been plenty of wonderful Nobel Prize winners, and there have been plenty of Nobel Prize winners that I respect, even though I don't agree with. And then there have been some that I just think were absolutely awful selections. And many of us could say that about, let's say, Paul Krugman, who I believe won in 2008, that one could question the scholarship that went behind his selection. But what I am more thinking of right now, rather than pinpointing particular people or cheerleading the economist I like or criticizing the ones I don't, is getting down to the methodology of what the Nobel Prize Committee is looking for. And right now, I want to suggest that this year, what they were looking for and what they did, in fact, reward with their selection was exactly what they should be looking to do. And some recent past winners are exactly what they should not be looking to do. And what I mean by this is that econometrics and very complex and almost utterly worthless models that the Nobel Prize Committee says this represents economics done first rate. This is what we're after. Worthless charts and metrics that are often selected either because of the prize put on intellectual obscurity or because in some cases these were economists who were after a certain social justice aim. I think that was largely the case with Simon Johnson winning it last year, but I'll try not to so heavily personalize my criticism of some of these folks. But I think that the Nobel Prize for Economics should go to economists who can tell us how things work in economics and why. And that when you understand how economic growth is generated, you understand the heart of economics, and being able to explain what happened and why represents the aspiration for anyone who can be considered an academic and an intellectually serious economist, and therefore should be in at least the candidate pool of what the Nobel Committee is after. This year, Joel Mocher, who is in the U.S., been a prof at Northwestern University, overseas at Tel Aviv, Philippe Aghion, who has been at the London School of Economics, but also University of Paris, and then Peter Howard at Brown University. These are the three award winners. They're not name brand economists. They're not people that most outside of the domain of academic economics would be familiar with. But what they are three very intellectually serious economists of somewhat differing schools of thought, in a lot of cases different than mine, who do value open societies, who do value productivity, who do value the role of freedom in driving innovation, and they also value and understand creative destruction. And their academic work, and it's sort of overlapping with one another, I think help to explain so much of why economic growth has moved into light speed in the last 150 years, and not only to describe what has happened, but to give us the understanding behind it, the why. And I think that this is largely lacking in so much of what the Nobel committees have been honoring lately. So the reason this topic came to mind, there's a link in the show notes, a Wall Street Journal article that I read. I think it's been at least a month, and it might be 2 months ago now, by David Henderson, who's an absolutely fantastic economist, one I've had the privilege of interacting with in the past. He's out of the Hoover Institute here in California. He's a total free market guy, one of the good guys. And I'm sure that there's areas in which David and I do not always agree, but for the most part, I consider him a pretty aligned practitioner of the right cogent economic worldview. And he wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal that is largely making the same point I'm trying to make here today in Capital Record, that we need the Nobel Prize to honor Nobel economists that are explaining how things work in economics, the why behind it, and not merely giving us obscurity hidden inside econometrics that are more self-congratulatory than they are productive. The reason I'm so happy that the Nobel Committee honored these three economists this year is that these are three pro-growth economists. And this sounds just utterly absurd to say, but being pro-growth has been out of favor in so much of economic academia as of late, and that's unforgivable. To understand creative destruction, to refer to creative destruction as a positive thing that advances change, and to be able to get into the why behind this, to not be fearful of creative destruction and lead your discussion of that to some form of either social or pharisaical moral cause, but rather get into the heart of where growth comes from out of creative destruction, I think is a significant need. And that the Academy was willing to honor it this way. By Academy, I mean the Nobel Committee that honors academic economists, I think is very encouraging. The particular language that Joel Mocher in particular has used to describe how the late 19th century industrial revolution kicked off growth, that how it spurned an era of unprecedented economic prosperity, is what he refers to as prescriptive knowledge and propositional knowledge, and how these two things intersect with one another. How the various innovations have not only advanced change, but worked together to advance the cause of human flourishing. You cannot understand these things without appreciating creative destruction, the notion that there is a time in which producers develop things that all at once advance our standard of living, make things better, make things more efficient, more productive, and in so doing, in advancing the greater cause of economic well-being, do damage to one smaller cause, because the computer replaces the typewriter and the automobile replaces the horse and buggy, and all the cliche analogies that are cliches for very good reasons that come to mind. There is a school of thought that will continue to bemoan the destruction done, and there is a school of thought that will celebrate it as an advancement of the wider objective of human flourishing. That the Nobel Committee this year honored three economists who are doing such great, and I would argue profound work in understanding this cause, this notion of where prescriptive and propositional knowledge drive economic advancement. I think is something we should celebrate. But I think we should also not ignore the fact that we're in a time in the academy that's vulnerable, that it could very well result next year in the Nobel Committee reverting to social justice warriors that can't do economics, that are just bad at it, or that are being rewarded for wild hyper progressive left wing theories, or some advanced econometrics that is extremely analytical, but his real underlying aim is to agendize central planning. This cannot be what we celebrate with the most prestigious award in economics. What we ought to celebrate is exactly what they celebrated this year in awarding it how they did. And that is those who understand how economic growth is created, who believe economic growth is a moral good in and of itself, and who understand that for those of us who want greater human flourishing for greater people, creative destruction is a part of that process, and that there is still plenty more to learn in what many, unfortunately, still refer to as the dismal science, but many of us believe to be the actual study of human action that leads to a better standard of living for all, if only we can protect the free and virtuous society that undergirds it. Thank you for listening to David Bahnsen's Capital Record.